All right, it's going.
This is a story about my grandmother. Her name is Georgia Liscombe, and she lived in Iowa. And she married when she was about 20, 22, 23, and she lived till she was about 86. And she lived as a housewife for two husbands. The first husband died in 1918 in the plague that they had. His name was Donald. I can't remember his middle name now, I'm too old. His name was Donald Liscombe. Well, I was named after him. Well, maybe not. I was named by another Donald in my family. He died. His name was Chauncey Ettinger. That's what it was. And when Chauncey died, his cousin came to the farm and said, he was a cousin, and he came and said, I will marry you if you want, and I won't expect other children, and I'll work the farm, and I won't ask you for anything or any inheritance or anything. I'll just be here. So Georgia married Donald, and Donald was my favorite grandfather of all times. I mean, there's just nobody like him. We did a lot of stuff. He had a 1937 Chevrolet car that was so beat up and dusty, when you hit the seats, they would just pile out with a bunch of dust because he leaves the windows open all the time. And what I did was I used to ride on the running board on the right side with my legs around the headlight, which was on the running board, on the what the hell is it called? The front fender swooped down, and the light was on the top of the fender, and it had a good ways to lock your legs so you wouldn't fall in front of the car or fall off. And we would go up in the pasture and other places that he liked to go. He had business to do. And Georgia stayed in the house almost all the time. I mean, she was light complected, never got any suntan much at all because she was always busy in the house. And she had two children, my father and my Aunt Nadine. My father's name was Farrell, after her maiden name. And they lived a nice, quiet life. She liked to play bridge. And she played bridge for 30 years probably, but finally she couldn't hear around the table. What is it called? The things where you say, I got this, or something like that. I don't know anything about bridge. So she had to quit. And that was an interesting story because I went to, we lived in Iowa, and we drove to Chicago. And she got a hearing aid. My uncle paid for it. My uncle, Nadine's husband, was very wealthy. He was in the aircraft industry. And he bought her hearing aids. And he also bought the car for them, which was a 1947 Ford. And so we went to this place, and there was an elevator in there. I played the hell out of that elevator. And when you went up, it was 4 floors, and then there was more height above it. And I enjoyed playing with that because I'd never seen one. I don't remember seeing one anyway. And inside the lobby of the hearing aid place was a bowl of fish, and I was real little, and I was about 10. And the bowl of fish you could see their guts, and they were clear. Everything else was clear, and their whole body was translucent white. They're transparent. And I just couldn't think anything needed in hell of that, because I was wondering how they would look when they got big, but they never got big, of course. Anyway, she got a hearing aid, and the way she used it was she had to take the hearing aid off the side of the hearing aid, which was on her breast, on this side, above her breast, and she would take out the cord and put it in her ear, and then she could talk in the phone. We had a phone that had a thing on the front, and she would call the operator, and the operator's name was Jen. And Jen was a maiden, what do we call it? Maiden, a maiden woman that, she worked in the telephone thing all of her life. And back then, the telephones had to be hooked up by sticking them in. So you call Jen, and you say, I want A20, which was my father's old phone number. And A20 she'd plug in A20, and the phone would ring on our line. We had a party line, of course, so when you had a party line, anybody could listen to what you were saying if they picked up the phone. And you almost had to have some people did that for entertainment, listening to people. Because if you pick the phone up real quick, you don't hear it click. You get away from the phone quick enough. And Jen was my emergency mother, because I lived 3 miles from the school, and I had to walk to school. And you hear this story about people walking to school. Well, by God, I had to walk to school 3 miles. And I had to walk back. But once in a while, I would catch a ride with basketball after the school was out. The basketball players would practice, and then they would drive by, and if they saw me, they'd pick me up and bring me home on the way. And they had a Jeep then. This was right after the Second World War, and they had a domestic Jeep, not a military Jeep with a roof on it. They had a roof on it and everything. So I got in there, and it was warm. And I got a funny story about that. I had a high jacket that was above my belt, or right at my belt. In the wintertime in Iowa, it got pretty damn cold, and the snow got so deep that the mailman had to walk the route, and at each mailbox they would dig down, put the mail in, and then stick the shovel up in the air so you could find it. And then when you came to get your mail, you had to dig out the mailbox again to get your mail. And then you'd close the mailbox, and it would fill in before the mailman got back. And so he had to dig his way in, and I had to dig the way out, or somebody did. And it was an exciting time for me. I really liked it. The war was over, Second World War. And there was a lot of stuff going on. People were buying used airplanes and flying around the airport we had, and did a lot of things that were exciting to me, because I was an Army guy. I liked all that stuff. I still do today. And so we worked. I didn't do much, but my father bought me getting away from Georgia here a little bit, but that's what happens. My father bought an auger to dig post holes. And he also built me a tree house, and I went up there and dug post holes and put stubby, broken fence posts in there all around my tree house, so that I couldn't be attacked by a tank, because I had a tank trap. And my father was so proud of me digging the post holes that he took me to my grandfather, because he was putting in a fence, and he wanted me to dig the holes. I dug one hole, and I lost interest in it right away, doing something like that for somebody else, I guess. So I didn't dig Grandpa's any of his post holes, but I kept him company, and we talked about stuff. And that's where I saw my first coyote, the only coyote I ever saw in Iowa. It was about 400 yards away. You could just see it. It was probably a female, and she was standing on the edge of the woods watching us, because we were too close to where her cubs were. So anyway, moving on, I had a lot of fun with my grandfather and his 37 Chevrolet. I think it was a Chevrolet, it wasn't a Ford. And I was born in 37 too. If you don't know what that means, it means 35 years after the first airplane flew, okay? That's a lot of stuff happened in 35 years, that first 35. And of course, it continued after that. So getting back to Georgia, Georgia's still at home, played bridge. My grandfather played poker on, I think, one night a week on the kitchen table. And he wasn't a good poker player, and once in a while he'd win, but not often. When he won, he would take all the money and put it around the table to show Georgia how much he won. It was, it was quarter raise or something. It was not a very big deal, dimes, nickels, and quarters. And that was local people that lived up and down the road nearby, because they all were a group of people that helped each other when there was some kind of disaster, or whether during the harvest season. They all came to help you with your harvest, and then you'd go up and help them with their harvest. And it took, when you had a threshing machine, it isn't like it is now where the machine does it itself and it automatically unloads it on a truck. It had a machine that would take the corn off the stalk, and the corn cobs then would go into a truck. And then you had to go somewhere and have it shelled, or you had to feed the horses and cows on the cob. And what you did there was for the horses, the work horses we're talking about here. My grandfather had a tractor, but he didn't. He used horses a lot, and he had me go in there and break the corn in 3 pieces, which was kind of hard because the corn's only 12 inches long, and you break the first one off, and then you don't have much leverage on the last blow to break the other one. The horse will eat the corn off the cobs a lot easier that way. And the cows ate the whole corn, so you had to break it in half, because they'll choke on it too. They'd eat the whole thing, just pick it up and grind it out, and grind the cob up and eat the cob too, which had a little bit of nutrient in it. So the milk cow got it done that way, and then he gave his cattle that were out in the yard shell corn, or sometimes he mixed it by an itinerant guy that rode around the families and had a machine that took the corn off the cob, and then you could have it ground, because another guy would come and grind it up and mix weight with it or whatever you wanted to put with it to make your food for the cattle. And of course, they mostly ate hay, but the main thing was hay, and they also ate pumpkins in the fall. You had to break them because they couldn't break them, so you had to throw them on the ground, which was a lot of fun. And then they would eat the pieces just like they eat the corn, and it got them a lot of nutrients, but not as much as corn does. So they ate corn, pumpkins, and hay, and they worked hard making a living. My grandfather had a horse tank, which is a tank about as big as a kitchen table, a little bigger, and it was clear full of moss on the bottom because he never drained it and cleaned it. My grandfather, Dovey Donald, he wasn't much of a farmer. He was not lazy, but he didn't do what most farmers do. They clean out the tank every couple of years. There was probably 10 inches of snotty green stuff in there, mold, not mold, but I can't remember what it's called. But anyway, when I wanted to go swimming in there, he would let me go swimming in it, but I couldn't stand up because it was so slick. And he says, I don't want you to ever come down here and get in this tank without me being here. And I never did, but a lot of kids died in horse tanks. A lot of kids died in them. because you fall down, then the first thing you do is take a big breath and you suck in a bunch of water, and you start coughing, you slip down, take another breath, next thing you know, you're croaked. So anyway, that was one of my live things, and I on his farm he had a building where he did his work. My father had the same kind of building on his farm, and in that building were barrels and tin things and all that, and I used to go in there and make music for myself. There wasn't much music, but it was beating on things, and it was fun, and it made a lot of noise, which I like to do, so I enjoyed that. So getting back to Georgia, she's sitting up there in the house, and during harvest season, her father built a house for her, and she wanted a big kitchen. The kitchen was about 20 feet long, 18 feet long, and it had a harvest table, they called it. It was about 10 feet long, and it was so when the harvesters came, there'd be a place for them to eat, because it was, most houses don't have that big a table. She had a cook stove in there, which was wood, and she had a sink that didn't work, but it was a sink. And there was a bucket of water that sat on the side of the sink that came from a well that was outside. There was a windmill about 30 feet from the house. And the windmill would pump when the wind blew, but it didn't always blow. And he had an old motor that would start, and it would pump the water enough for whatever they were going to do, or the water for the house. And then you brought it in the house, set it on the other side of this table from the other side of the sink, and had a dipper in it, so you could go get a drink of water anytime you wanted. And finally they got electricity. That was before my time. There was no electricity. There was electricity in my time, but not much before. The REA, which is Rural Electrical Association, I think it is, came through all the farms in the country and brought electricity to people in the country. And most light bulbs in the room were cords hanging down from the ceiling with a light bulb in them. And then they started moving around and making things better with receptacles on the wall, and you could plug in a lamp, or you could plug in the baby's heating system. It was always cold in Iowa, always cold. That enough?
Yeah. It stopped.
Stop. That's good. I'll think of some more things.